Can I just start out by saying I think I've got the best job in the world. And one of the reasons I have a best job in the world is that I get on a regular, not quite daily, but almost daily basis, the opportunity to be in situations like this. And that is a situation in which I seem to have almost everything in the palm of my hands. I have three amazing speakers today who are all experts, and they've earned the right to talk how they talk because they've walked the walk before they did that. And it is not just an opportunity, it is a privilege for me to be able to be in a place like this, to talk to women like this. And so without further ado, I think it's probably a good chance to jump right in. Our topic is Whose Lives Matter. I'm an old man, I guess now. I can remember a day probably 30, 40 years ago when I was a younger man, and I suddenly thought, wow, the world is fixed. Everything's going to be great. Things are going to move along, and progress will be infinite, and everyone will live happily ever after in a loving kind of world. And I guess, there was some way in which, even though I wasn't young anymore, I was still very naive. I thought, this is maybe 9 or 10 years ago, when a black man was elected president of the United States, I thought, well, yeah, things have really moved along. And there has been a sea change in the way we look at the world. Plainly, I was wrong. Plainly, the world has not gone on a straight path towards some kind of progressive future. But we're living in a world that still has many questions that are being asked by many people who are disadvantaged, and not only disadvantaged, who are literally being dealt with violently by the forces of authority and of power in our society. And that's what we're here to talk about. The three guests, as I said, have all walked the walk as well as talking the talk. We're going to start with Jenaya Khan, who is one of the founders, a co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Canada. She's got quite a number of things on her CV. As I read the list, she is an activist, a boxer, probably helps with the activism in some cases, a social justice educator, she's a writer, a journalist, and she's an organizer, in fact, a director of something called Los Angeles Gender Justice Law Group. And she's also works in Toronto a great deal, and she's here to begin things today. Jenaya.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hi, y'all. So I think we should get something out of the way pretty quickly. And I understand that it's often the most burning question when people think about Black Lives Matter. So I'm just going to get it out there right from the jump. Yes, we are all this cute. It's not a coincidence. Yes. Now that we've gotten that really burning question out of the way, I think to some degree we've all sat on a panel like this a number of times, and the question "Whose lives matter" comes up often. In a time when saying Black Lives Matter, just saying that Black people have inherent value, that our lives have meaning, is something that's considered controversial. That to name ourselves, to articulate our existence in a way that is profound and powerful and feels threatening to so many people. And I'm often met with this, how do I get people to see in like 3 to 7 minutes? I'm an 8-minute kind of person. And so I can tell you some things that are on my mind now. And hopefully, Paul, your questions will be really great. So I'm reading Coretta Scott King's autobiography. And in it, she's documenting her experiences as a freedom fighter and her experiences with Martin Luther King Jr. And that, looking back, is really challenging because the things that they were fighting for, we're fighting for. And it's hard to read something like the Voting Rights Act, that was years in the making, and to see something that took decades rolled back by the Trump administration, and by the previous administration, and by the right-wing Republicans, and what that means when all that work, when decades of work can be undone in a matter of days or hours, in a room where many of us would never be allowed in. And what does it mean when people are making decisions about our lives and we're not at the table? And so when there's a reality like that, when I'm looking back and recognizing that we're fighting for the exact same things, when I sometimes feel like an ambulance chaser, because there's so many things can lead to fatality when you're a Black person. So, when I think of whose lives matter, I think of what are our lives worth? Is my life worth a noise complaint? Is that enough to end it? When I call police for help because maybe I'm having an episode, maybe it's a bipolar episode like Junior Reginald Thomas, or maybe I'm in crisis like Andrew Loku. And that need for help is seen as something threatening. So much so that a decision can be made within 21 seconds, as was in the case with Andrew Loku, a man who went through years of being a child soldier, lived through Civil War, came to Canada, got his education, was supporting his family back home, only for his life to be snuffed out within 21 seconds. And though I think it's easy to see in the news our protests, it's so important to note that protest is not often the place we start. Why in the world would we say the first place to go is to put our very bodies on the line? There are multiple attempts at interventions beforehand. And in fact, I've just named some of those legacies where some of us, in the world inherit wealth and some of us inherit struggle. And so one life is a years-long campaign and years-long work. And that's the work that we're committed to. And so how can we talk about justice when a life has already been lost? And when lives have already been lost? And so these are the tensions that we exist within. And these are the contradictions that exist. That what does justice look like when we're already at such a massive loss? When there's already been such an incredible loss of life? And so we have to be really creative, and we have to find joy in each other. And so, as much as, it might be easy to think all we do is talk about revolution, we also talk about joy and the type of world that we're creating, because we understand that revolution isn't just the ending of something, it's the beginning of something, something new, something that has a larger table, that has more people at it, something that feels more collaborative. And so how do I explain then structural racism to you? How do I explain that? How can I concretely make you see? Because the data is out there. And in fact, data is one of the things that we're fighting for in Canada. Canada with its great myth of being a racial haven, its great myth of being something different than the States. And so there's often this projection of, well, it can't be like this here because look how bad the States, look how terrible the States are right now. And so I'll hear this, and then I'll also be reading simultaneously the rise of white nationalism in the country, the rise of the radicalization of white men. Something is very wrong here when we're talking about acknowledging that this is indigenous land, and yet on so many reserves, there isn't access to clean running water. So there's that, and then there's why do you always have to make it about race? It's really fascinating because it's almost as if in saying Black Lives Matter and in challenging systemic racism and structural oppression, it's almost like we're being blamed for a type of race war. But here's the reality. We didn't start one. We're trying to end one. That's what this is, and that's what this feels like, right? Why do we always have to make it about race? When we're together, we talk about everything. We talk about art, we talk about joy, we talk about music. It's only when I'm in spaces with people who don't look like me and the projections that they put on my body and the things that are said to me that it becomes about race. And I have friends, and they're wonderful. They're this older white couple, and they've been very good to me, and we play Scrabble together. Sometimes I win. We have a good time, but we've known each other for maybe 10 years or so, and they're in their 70s. And so we were having a discussion, and our debate was whether integration actually served Black people. And that's a really heavy thing to discuss. Well, not for me, I kind of love that stuff. But in that, we talked about segregation. And she said to me, sometimes I feel like the tactics you all use, they feel segregationist. And I said, do you feel that way when there's a room full of white people in it? Because those are the spaces that I'm often in, and it's never referred to as segregationist. Or what about a law body or an administration, a political administration, an institution, a corporation that is only white people? That is an overwhelming reality, actually, in North America. Are those spaces also considered segregationist? And what does it mean then to just haphazardly include an entire population of people that have been historically, economically, and socially and politically disadvantaged and just throw them into a system that was never meant to serve them? Because I can say that, and we can all say, I think, that some things have improved, and yet we also know that Black Caribbean youth have the highest rate of expulsion and dropout rate, along with Indigenous youth. I'm Black and Caribbean. That I can look at statistics, the few that exist in Canada, and say that there's a disproportionate rate of youth that look like me who are in foster care. And I know this because I grew up in foster care. And I can say that there's the data that suggests, and the data that proves that Black people are overly criminalized in the country. And in fact, up until just recently, you were more likely to be carded, which is the American version of stop and frisk, where you can be, just stopped by a police officer and questioned, and you're expected to give your personal information and whatever ID you have, that you are more likely to be carded on the streets of Toronto than stopped and frisked on the streets of New York City. What do I have to prove that reality exists beyond the data? That it happened to me. That I've had multiple run-ins with police before I was an activist. And all of these things shaped my reality in the way that poverty and growing up in public housing in Toronto shaped my reality. But my story and my life is not some cautionary tale. I deserved better. And our youth deserve better. That I shouldn't have to be exceptional to win. That my dreams should be like anyone else in this room, not just to get free or to imagine what freedom looks like. And and in some way, on a human level, I think what we're all wondering what that could look and feel like, because the truth is, this system is not good for a lot of people here. Anyone who doesn't fit into a very particular and very specific norm. So I find kin in sex workers, I find kin in the trans community, I find kin in those fighting for disability justice. Not all of our experiences intertwine, and none of us start out remarkable, but we become remarkable when we're fighting for things like freedom and for justice and for liberation. And there's this idea that you have to start out this way, and I don't think anyone does, except for me, I did. And art is such an integral component of that, and I know Devante will be able to speak to that much more eloquently than I, but I will say that where it serves us and where it has served us, I see protest as performance art, but the reality is we are so ill-equipped in 2017 to talk about anything around race or racial tensions or racism, that to say white privilege is to watch a space completely implode. That when I was in university, when I went to York, saying white privilege could completely destroy the classroom. It was ridiculous. And then all the explanations would come out. Well, I'm not white. I'm 30% like German and 80% European and 3% skim milk, and it just would go on and on. And I just realized that what they're hearing is you've never been through anything in your life. When they hear white privilege, and I thought what a politically immature system and politically immature young people were producing. That to hear white privilege, to hear, I'm telling you, you've never been through anything in your life. Privilege isn't about what you've been through. That's yours. Privilege is about what you haven't had to go through. And when we're naming white privilege, when we speak to that, and we talk about a system that privileges and favors people who look white, people who have inherited wealth, people who have had access and upward mobility for centuries, that we're actually not even capable of having that conversation in 2017. And under those circumstances, saying Black Lives Matter is controversial. To say that my life has meaning, that the Bee's life has meaning, that Sandy's life has meaning, that Andrew Loku or Jermaine Kerby's life had meaning. And while I want to say to you that I have answers, I can only tell you that I ask better questions now. And I expect that from all of us that are asking better questions. That, who said this? Nelson Mandela said something about, it's not just about where you stand, it's where you sit. Who's at your table? What conversations are you having? Are there people in your life who look like me? When you hear something, do you interrupt it? Because I can tell you, and you can give me the time check, Paul, because you know I'm very chattas. When I was in London when Paris was bombed, and that was tragic. It was a horrific thing. And the next day in London, a Muslim woman in a hijab was pushed in front of an oncoming train. And I thought that this white man who had pushed her, what were the things that he said before that moment that we didn't interrupt? What were the things that he did? The microaggressions, as we call them, the slight gestures, the lip curling up, the frown. What were the things, where were the interventions that didn't happen, that needed to happen in order for a Muslim woman not to be pushed into an oncoming train? That is really our responsibility. When we don't interrupt, we don't know what could happen. There's only a few things that do happen when we're interrupted. Sometimes we feel unsafe. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's hard to find the words. Sometimes a no is enough. But I know that there's only a few things that could happen to me when I interrupt. But when I don't interrupt, I don't know what could happen. I don't know what the implications of that are, of that. You know, I don't. And so I'll end, because, you know, I have to remind myself too. I'll end with something along the lines of, I like concrete things, but I find myself leaning more into possibility and what that means. That we have to be creative, that we have to imagine new ways of being, and that we have to actually live and practice them, that we have to actually live as if the impossible were possible, that we actually have to model something that we've never actually seen before. And that it starts there. That that practice becomes a culture. And that becomes an intervention. That somebody imagined borders, and somebody imagined police, and somebody imagined chains on bodies. And enough people believed those things to make it true. And so we have to be the disruptors of truth. We have to imagine differently. And we have to make it true. That is our task, and that's the work that we're doing. That's the work that Black Lives Matter seeks to do. We started off as an intervention, and it became an idea that turned into a vision and a movement actualized around it. And it's a movement that is continuing to grow and that is continuing to transform. But we're here for the long haul. And we're hoping that as time goes on, in the same way that people look back now and congratulate folks like Martin Luther King Jr. and that entire administration. When I read those stories in Coretta Scott's autobiography, that wasn't what was, those weren't the accolades that he was receiving at that time, and that all those black women who supported that movement and made that movement possible, they weren't receiving that. So my prompt to you is, don't make us wait. I don't want to be told that we did the right thing when I'm 65, when I'm 70 years old, or perhaps when I'm no longer here, because that is the reality for people who do the work that we do. Tell us now, and join us in that fight. We have to imagine differently and make it true. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenaya. Thank you for many things. Thank you for the questions, which I think were honest and candid and very serious questions, and not easy questions. And that's the task that I think is in front of us. Now, thank you also, though, for what I took as a sort of hope of optimism, or a touch of optimism in the idea that this has to be a creative process, that it has to be fun, that it has to be something that people work on imagining a better world. And I think that logically that's a perfect segue to be, I think, who is a dub poet. She's Jamaican Canadian. She's not only a dub poet, she's a monologist, I guess. She writes monologues or dramas that are monologues. In fact, she's a playwright. She's won 3 Dora Awards, by the way, for being both an actor and a playwright. She runs something called the Wata Theatre, which produces political theater from a radical feminist perspective. And she's here to talk about whose lives matter this morning. To be.
Granny, what is this skin that I'm in? This brown, chocolatey skin? Granny, what is beneath my skin? My blood, my bones, my muscles, Granny? Granny, what does this skin that I'm in mean? Is it different from other skins, Granny? Granny, what about the little girls on the street who have nowhere to live and nothing to eat, Granny? Granny, the little girls who look like me. Granny, I love it when you hold me tight and wrap me up, Granny. I feel so safe and so special, Granny. Does everybody in the whole entire world deserve to feel safe and so special, Granny? Do they? Granny, what are borders? What are borders, Granny, and who decides where they are drawn, Granny? And Granny, what is a bank account, Granny, and a passport, Granny? And Granny, what does this skin that I'm in mean, Granny? Granny, I don't want you to die and go to that never land, because then I'll be left all alone in this place, Granny, and I don't like it. I'm afraid, Granny. Granny, do you ever feel afraid, Granny? Do you ever feel afraid that you're going to die, Granny? Granny, I don't want to die. But everything is born and everything dies. Even the sun shining above will die someday. It is the moments between that matter. The choices we make in those moments that matter. And there are many choices to make at the crossroads. So remember what Eshu teaches us. Iwapele. Choose wisely. Choose carefully. Choose with a good head and a good heart. So what does it mean to have a good head and a good heart? Growing up in Jamaica, I was surrounded by the theater. And I had the incredible privilege to be raised in a community that simultaneously understood the crossroads and the intersection of storytelling and the people's lived reality. The storytelling is incredible. It makes me feel like 3 years old every time I come up against it, because it gives me all the possibilities of potential and understanding. Like, how do I understand this world? Do you know this world where I don't like video games, but I'm gonna give a video game analogy because I was thinking about it, and it's the closest thing I could think of, right? So in this video game, in this world of this video game, these sentient beings are born, right? All kinds of sentient beings. Sentient beings who have consciousness, a particular kind of consciousness. Sentient beings who have a different kind of consciousness, but there's all kinds of sentient beings, right? And anything goes in this video game. Anything goes. Like, the rules are being made up as you go along, and the rules can change at any time, and the sentient beings themselves are helping to co-create this world of this video game. And in this video game, you are born into realities. So those realities come with gender classification, racial classification, a sexuality classification, ability classification. You can be born into anything. And the classifications are simultaneously being given to you, projected onto you, but there's also room for choice. So this is a very sophisticated kind of game. You know what I'm saying? This is not Nintendo. You know what I'm saying? This is really sophisticated. Now, the point of the game is to survive. Now, you have to survive. And as a sentient being in this game, you can survive by any means necessary, right? So you have to ask yourself as a player, what does survival mean? And does survival extend into thrival? And for you as a player in this game, what are going to be the principles that you are going to play by? Because remember, anything goes. Anything goes. Like, for example, the game will tell you that there are rules to play by. And some people will play by those rules, but there are also other very sophisticated levels where you can break those rules, and as long as other players don't know, it's okay. Right? So as long as other people don't know that other players don't know that you're breaking those rules, that's fine. It's also in this game, there are certain rules for certain players. So not all rules apply to all players. And in fact, you can be born into parts of this game where you even exist above all the rules. And you get to take like a godlike position and look down on all the players and actually get to determine a very, very large part of how this game is played. So again, let's go back to the principles. As a player, if anything goes, what is going to inform the principles by which you play this game? What's going to inform that? Now, in this game, there are ideologies, there are belief systems. You can call some things religion, you can call some things spiritualities, you can call some things, you name it, right? And those ideas help the players to determine the principles by which they're going to play. But again, everybody has a different idea of what survival means. And the game is an old game. So when you come into it, there's a lot that has happened before you arrived. And you were birthed into your categorizations, both the ones that you choose and the ones that are being projected onto you. So what are the principles by which you are going to play the game? This is the question that I am obsessed with. I can't seem to get it out of my body, out of my system. What are these principles? So I can only speak from my personal standpoint. The principles that were passed on to me through my mentors, right? Because mentors are everywhere. Mentors are these people who you can learn from, these ideas that you can learn from. The other incredible thing about this game is you can get to the end of the game and really feel that you did nothing. And when you arrive at that place, whether it's like early on in the game or later on in the game, it will determine how you feel about your present tenseness. So you could be gray, and be at the end of the game and be like, I it up. I did nothing with my time in that game. And you could be really early on in the game and be able to sit and be like, you know what? If I end up getting booted out tomorrow, the time that I used in this game was well spent, and it's okay for me to go. So you know what? I could even go to the front lines and be in the face of fire and decide that that's what I want to do, because it means that when I'm out of the game, I'm able to say, I played it to the best of my ability, being governed by these principles that I was working with throughout the game. So, the principles that we're going to play this game by. You can be born into whatever you're born into. You can be born into whatever you're born into. I was born into some stuff, you know? And I still have to co-determine the principles that I'm going to live by. So I don't get an out. I am always accountable and responsible for the principles that I'm going to live by, that I'm going to play this game by. What principles are you playing the game by? What principles? Now, do I need to be in love with somebody, a person in the game? Do I need to be in love with them to understand that they have certain categorizations and certain realities in order to care about them? Is that the only circumstance on which I am going to extend myself in this game to somebody else? I've got to be in love with them? Really? Really? Do you know what I'm saying? Because we get into discussions about race and class and all the ways in which we have been separated and in which systems of power continue to work themselves over us. And sometimes we get to the place where I can't actually care about that person or those people because I'm not romantically involved with them. There's nobody in my family romantically involved with them. We don't work at the same place. And there's nothing at stake for me, so I just need to play this game. Really? Because remember, when you get to the end of the game, there's an opportunity to look and see the choices that you made. So I'm sitting here, look at me. This is what I'm working with. Do I need to be in love with a person in a wheelchair to understand that when they're playing the game from that wheelchair, there's certain things that I'm going to be able to do and they're not going to be able to do? Do I need to be in love with them to understand that? And to care about the fact that what I'm playing with and what they're playing with may be different things and it may put me in a different position. Do I need to be in love with them? Do I need to be in love with someone who maybe presents the way I present, but who's telling me, but I am a masculine identified person? Do I need to be in love with them to understand and respect them saying to me, I know I look like you, the way you present as a woman, but I'm actually a dude? Do I need to be in love with them to understand and appreciate what they're saying to me and to respect what they're saying to me? Like, do they need to be in my blood family for me to get that? Really? So this is the thing that I'm obsessed with, right? What is it that makes us care and give about other people beyond our reality, beyond our direct reality? And the only person I can ask that question of is myself. What makes me care about another player in this game beyond the reality that I am currently in? What makes me care about them? I have to start with myself because I believe in accountability and responsibility. Am I accountable? I have children, and in having children, I see the ways in which trauma and abuse perpetuate themselves in a traumatized body because I see myself perpetuating it. Now, what does it take for me to acknowledge that, realize that, speak the truth about that, and then change that? Because I'm saying if I can commit to that, then I can definitely ask of the world to commit to that. Every time I work on my own limitations as a human being in this game of survival, and every time I have to ask myself to extend myself beyond what I've been given, I am asking those same questions of the people around me in this game. And I want us to ask ourselves, what does it take for me to care about something beyond my own lived experience and beyond my own reality? What does it take? What does it take for me to invest in a set of principles in a game where anything goes? A set of principles that are going to guide my performance in this game. These principles are not new ideas. As I'm looking out, I'm looking mostly at elders. You are my elders, so you know. These principles are old principles, the principle of self-knowledge. What do I know about myself as a human being, which includes knowing about the history of our humanity, a history that is riddled in unfairness. This game is super unfair. It is super unfair. And it's not only unfair racially. It is unfair in terms of gender, sexuality, class. Many of us sitting in this room have experienced the ways in which this game has been rigged, and in which we perpetuate that riggedness by the principles we choose to play by. Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, the question is, what principles are you playing by? My own actions in this game are based on my own principles. That's what I'm going by. Is I'm here to survive. I'm here to survive. I'm here to survive. I have chosen. Now this is what I have chosen. Observing the game and choosing how I'm going to play. I choose to play by a set of principles. I do. I choose to play by a set of principles because I know what it feels like to be cut and to bleed and to be in pain. I know what that feels like. It hurts. It hurts. It hurts really bad. It hurts really bad. So when I do that to other people, I remember, because I have a memory. I remember what that feels like. And so that principle guides the way I play this game. Do I want to do that to the people who are in the game with me? No, I don't. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that because I remember how it feels. I feel like it's so important. I have to make it very simple in order to understand it. Otherwise, everything goes over my head. I have to bring it down to real, personal, like moment-to-moment things. Otherwise, I can't grasp it. I can't conceptualize it because it is so incredibly complex. So I have to make it simple. The principles that I play by, self-knowledge, orality, what stories have I been told? What stories am I telling? Are those stories rooted in a truth that I understand? Rhythm, how am I living in my day-to-day? Like how am I eating? How am I sleeping? How am I communicating? How am I treating this temple? Politics, how am I holding power and giving power? How am I abusing the power that I have? How is the power that's outside of me being abused? Language, how am I communicating? Am I actually trying to share these principles that are governing my life? Or am I trying to just amass as much power as I possibly can so that I can be above vulnerability? Urgency. Do I understand that this game is not going to last forever? And what I do in it matters. How I play it matters. Sacredness. Is this a sacred game? Even though anything goes, is it a sacred game to me? It actually is. I've decided that. Because these sentient beings have a lot of decision-making power in this game. So I've decided that this game is sacred. And integrity. Integrity. For this game to happen, all kinds of interlocking, over-connected, intersecting systems have to work. That's integrity. Integrity. Integrous. Am I integrous? Am I integrous in my body? What does integrity mean? These are the principles. Like I was saying, as I'm looking out at mostly elders, these principles are coming from ancient knowledges that all of our peoples have had access to. Indigenous knowledges, whether we're talking about indigenous people from this land, indigenous people from the continent of Africa, indigenous people from what we call Southern America, indigenous people from Europe, indigenous people. Ultimately, everybody come from Africa. Ultimately. Everybody come from Africa. Then people started to spread out, and then them get light skin over time because of coal. Isn't it? And that's what the scientists them tell me. And me believing that the scientists them, right? So if you trace it back, it's like, okay, all right, everybody come from Africa, okay? So, but this game, this principles, and these old indigenous principles, this is what I was talking about. These old indigenous principles, they're there, and we know what they are. We know what they are. Now, my question is, what kind of popular educational system could we create that could reinvest in these principles? Because clearly, the sentient beings who are playing this game, there have been all kinds of disconnects with these principles, these old principles, right? These old principles of empathy and compassion, recognizing that we're with the land, recognize we can't do anything without the land. But when we look historically, we see that there are cycles and cycles and cycles of colonization, imperialism, people enslaving people, enslaved people rebelling. Like, this is a long legacy of these habits, ways of playing this game. It's a long, long legacy. What we have inherited didn't happen just yesterday. What we have all inherited is what we've inherited, right? This is old news. But as we are coming to the end of our time in this game, and make no mistake, we will all come to the end of our time in this game. That's one of the rules. You can't be there playing forever, okay? As we are here together now, and we realize we're coming to the end of our time in this game, how are we going to use the rest of the time? And what kind of principles are we going to apply the rest of our time with? Are we going to continue perpetuating certain behaviors in the game that directly murder other players? We're not talking about fiction. Directly murder other players. Decisions like making sure that certain players don't have access to certain things. And that is both systemic and social and personal. We're talking about we're talking about isolating and ostracizing our children when they tell us they are queer or trans or gay. Like not speaking to our children and cutting them off of the family. So that's really personal. But we're also talking about not hiring certain actors in certain spaces because they don't fit. And not allowing certain stories in certain spaces because they don't fit. So the expressions of these ideas, whether we call it racism, classism, sexism, ableism. Notice I'm staying away from the isms because sometimes when the isms come up, then we just, walls go up. I'm talking about isms. I'm talking about these behaviors that specifically make it impossible for certain players in this game to get anywhere other than 6 feet under. Do you know what I'm saying? And a question I have for us again is, do I need to be in love, like my heart is at stake for me to care? 1,000,001 questions I have for myself, 1,000,001 questions I have for you, and these are the principles that guide my participation in this game. Every day, day in, day out. And what I want to leave you with is looking back at how you've played so far, right? It's not just a question for you, it's a question for me, right? Looking back at how you've played so far. And they're talking about, I don't have power to do this, I don't have power to do that, I don't impact that. I'm just talking about our own personal lived experience. So the place where we have the most power. Looking back at how you've played so far and the amount of time you have left, what principles are you going to play by? What principles? What principles are you going to play by? What is going to determine those principles that you play by? Knowing that when you look around at the other players, you're essentially the same thing. You're essentially the same thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you're essentially the same thing. what principles are you going to play by?
Wow. To be young anitafrika, thank you for that. Thank you for continuing the questions. Again, serious questions, honest questions, difficult questions. Thank you for importing your grandmother at the very beginning. I think there's a sort of mentoring quality that I'm happy to have on the stage here with us today. And thank you, I think, for taking it creatively to another level, something that we, I think, can investigate a little further as the discussion continues. Move on now to Sandra Hudson, who's the final panelist today. She's a graduate student at the University of Toronto, where she's working on a master's in social justice. She was, in fact, the first black woman student union president at the University of Toronto, and she's also one of the founding co-founders of the Black Lives Matter in Canada. Sandra Hudson.
Thank you. I'm feeling a lot of pride right now because there's a Jamaican massive up here on the stage. And I'm just feeling really good about that. Repping my flag. It's been a wild 3 years since we started Black Lives Matter Toronto. And one of the things I'm constantly asked to do is justify the reason for our existence. Justify the reason for our existence as a movement, as an organization that struggles for what it is we struggle for. And that has been incredibly frustrating over these last few years. So I'm gonna impart to you a few stories that will tell you a little bit about our origin, that will tell you a little bit about our creativity, about our commitment, that will tell you a little bit about how not alone we are, even though it feels incredibly isolating sometimes. And we'll tell you a little bit about where we need to go. So I'll start with the origin story. Being black in this place can be incredibly isolating. Because of the way that Canada likes to tell itself myths, there's a lot of myths in this place about who we are. And most of those myths come from a comparison of ourselves to other people who happen to be living a little bit geographically south to us. And these myths that we tell ourselves are predicated on the idea that this line that, as Jenaya so well put it, somebody one day imagined, this line, the 49th parallel, is so strong that it can stop certain cultural practices, certain beliefs in a whole entire geography. How magical. And so much of our job, or what we've felt like we've had to do, is to disabuse people of these myths. So the origin story. When Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson, that was an incredibly isolating experience for a lot of black people around the world to see that happen. In Toronto, it was frustrating for another reason, and that was because a man named Jermaine Kerby had been similarly murdered by police officer Ryan Reid in Peel Region in Brampton, just a suburb of Toronto. And because of how these myths work and how media helps these myths become real, we didn't hear about Jermaine Kerby in the news in the way that we heard about Mike Brown. And some of you who are watching this might think to yourself, but I have heard about Jermaine Kerby. And if you have, that's because we struggled to make sure that you knew his name. There's a lot of people who did a lot of work to make sure that people would know that story. And if you haven't heard the story, I will tell it to you. So Jermaine Kerby was in a vehicle in Brampton, driving, as the police have put it, there was a routine traffic stop, and that's not real in Brampton. Like that's something you hear from the United States, routine traffic stops. That's not a real thing. There's no policy, there's no routine about traffic stops in Brampton, Toronto. That's not a thing. But as the police will tell the story, there was a routine traffic stop. Jermaine Kerby, apparently, according to the police, had a knife that was hidden in his pants, a knife that nobody found on the scene afterwards, but it was okay, a police officer brought it later. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? And he was shot and killed. And only 2 years later did we find out that he was shot in the back, actually, by this police officer. And so we were feeling isolated and angry because of Mike Brown, but we were also feeling isolated and angry because nobody cares about these types of things when they happen north of the 49th parallel, because of the myth that allows people to erase those types of things happening, to refuse to see it, to say it's not true, it can't happen here. And I was contacted by my little brother, Michael. And he was beside himself with frustration and grief about Mike Brown and about Jermaine Kerby. And he said, somebody has to do something. And you just heard I was the first Black student union president at U of T. I was the kind of student union president, there's different kinds. There's some who just want to throw parties, and then there are some who throw other things, rallies, occupations, that kind of thing. And I had all of these skills that I had taught myself from being creative around how to change a system. And my brother encouraged me that day to start something new. So we brought people together, and we thought, we'll hold a vigil for Mike Brown, but we'll also make sure that everybody knows Jermaine Kerby's name. And so, with very little time, very, very little time, we put together a vigil. And I know my organizing skills. I'm a very good organizer. I'm not shy about saying that. I know what we organized for. We organized for about 50 people to come out in front of the US consulate in Toronto. We got some candles, a little bit of food, to memorialize these lives. And 3,000 people came out. 3,000 mostly Black people came out to be together, to cry together, to laugh together, to share joy with one another, to share grief with one another. 3,000 people when you organized for 50. We never intended to become an organization. It was supposed to be just a one-off thing. But we knew at that moment that we had tapped into something. That isolation that we all feel, it wasn't just about me or Jenaya or anyone else on our team that we work with. So many other people were feeling this and were telling us by being there that they needed something like this, some sort of mobilizing force to say no more. And that's what we did. Now, again, people are often saying, justify yourself. And it's interesting, since we've begun, Black Lives Matter organizations have cropped up across this country, from Vancouver to Edmonton to Montreal to folks in Halifax to Peterborough to Hamilton. There's all sorts of different geographies in which Black people are coming together and saying, we can't take this anymore here. And I'm here to tell you that this is not easy work. I have a full-time job. And then I go home and I work full-time on this struggle. It's not easy. It is very difficult. It's depressing. It's painful. There's some fun too. There's some fun. But it's very, very difficult. And I'm telling you right now that all of these people who are doing this work across this country, across the United States, across the world, that should be justification enough. Nobody would do this. Nobody would do this if it wasn't necessary. Nobody would do this if it wasn't necessary. We, for years in Toronto, you know, when I think about the question, the big question we're asking today, whose life matters? For years, we come from a legacy, a great legacy of people who've come before us and done this type of struggle, this type of work. And there's been years and years, if we just even focus in just in Toronto, of people doing excellent work, demanding change, demanding something more, demanding shifts. And when I hear that question, whose lives matter, I think about who's answering the question and what they would say. And one of the things that I think about with respect to that is, of these people who've come before us and have done all of this work, in Toronto there's report after report after report after report of what it means to live a Black life in that city, in this country. And there's recommendation after recommendation after recommendation, and consultation after consultation after consultation. There was a big report that was released yesterday from the Black Experience Project, which is actually a repeat of another Black Experience Project that was begun in the 1960s. A lot of the recommendations haven't changed. Because they weren't implemented. Why aren't they implemented? There's all these pats on the back, these lovely media opportunities when a politician stands in front of a crowd and says, "We've announced another consultation. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to get a bunch of Black people into a room. We're going to talk to them. We're going to find out what they're really struggling with. We don't know. We don't understand. We can't really tell what the issue is. We don't know what it is. We really need to study this. We need to really figure it out. Because how can we change anything if we don't get it? Well, people have been telling you for over 50, 60, 200, 300, 400 years what the problems are. How much more do you need to study it? And I say this as a student who's studying it. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense. People are screaming it, have been screaming it. The recommendations have been there, and they're being ignored. It's not enough to have these consultations. It's not enough to have these recommendations. I'm sick and tired of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. Are we the only ones who know how to take action? It doesn't make any sense. I also think about Devante Miller, and this was a story that's come up quite recently in the press of a young Black man, 19 years old, so really just a man, who was beat up in Whitby by a Toronto police officer so badly that he's lost his eye. You only hear about the issues that, quite honestly, because we know about so many different cases, you only hear about the cases that people struggle to elevate. You know, that what happened to Devante Miller didn't happen this year. You know, people are struggling to elevate these stories, and that's what you hear about. But when I hear about Devante Miller, I think about all of the stories of people who both died and didn't die that you never hear about, that we know about because we live it in our communities. But even us in Black Lives Matter, we have a principle that we don't elevate these stories unless we have some sort of family involvement, because we're not trying to traumatize people who are closest to the issue. So there are stories that I could tell you about that we won't, out of respect for whom we're working with. But just know that of the stories you've heard from us in the last few years, there are so much more. So much more. And part of the reason we have these issues about consultations and recommendations is because we also are dealing with a media in this place that is woefully unprepared to deal with these issues. I'll tell you another story that describes that quite well. It's happened just a couple weeks ago, maybe. Andrew Loku, there was a coroner's inquest for the police killing of Andrew Loku, who Jenaya described earlier was a man in crisis, killed by police within 21 seconds of them arriving at his home. At the conclusion of the coroner's inquest, what was remarkable, and I say remarkable in the true meaning of that word is to be remarked upon. It's not like amazing or anything, it's just remarkable. What was remarkable was that the jury of that coroner's inquest, for the first time of all coroner's inquests that have dealt with things like this, acknowledged anti-Black racism as something that really needed to be looked at in order to prevent deaths like these, in the future. So this is a kind of a big deal. A mental health organization that had been working with Andrew Loku and that Andrew Loku worked for across boundaries had a press conference about this and how important this was. And they invited us, Black Lives Matter, to also present at the press conference, given that there was a lot of work that we had done around elevating Andrew Loku's case, but also securing some significant policy changes in his name. And Across Boundaries spoke about all of the work that they had done, about the coroner's inquest, for which they had official standing. They spoke about a number of different measures that had been recommended and how they felt about them. And we gave a brief, also, discussion. A reporter then says, okay, I have some questions for Across Boundaries. I'll ask them later, but I want to speak to you, points at me, because you spoke so eloquently and so well. You're so articulate. And for those of you who don't know, this is something that Black people hear a lot sometimes, that they're articulate, that they're well-spoken, and it just comes as as though it's a shock that I am that way. I'm really talented in so many ways. And for him to have put such a point on it, it really meant that either he wasn't expecting me to speak that well or that some sort of attack was coming next. It was the second. He then says to me, "You don't seem to understand how coroner's inquests work. you don't seem to understand how the system works. A coroner's inquest isn't meant to change a system, so you seem unhappy with the inquest. Haven't you thought of maybe focusing your attention on places that could really change this type of a situation, like the Special Investigations Unit, which is the watchdog body that is supposed to make sure the police are, not terrorizing people? Haven't you thought of focusing on the Special Investigations Unit or the police or maybe the city? Like that's where you should focus, not coroner's inquests. And so a few things happen here. One, this is a journalist who's allowed to be so mediocre that he hasn't done any research as to what we do. Because we have managed to, in fact, secure significant changes in the Special Investigations Unit, the city, and so on. And of course, we focus on those things. But he also didn't listen to me, because I wasn't attacking coroner's inquests. I had merely said that the measures that we have after something like this happens are not enough to stop something like this from happening. It's not enough to get us justice, and so on and so on. Anyway, I took it in stride. I hear these types of things all the time, and I answered the question. And then one of my team members didn't want to let it go. And she went to the mic and she said, I have something to say. What you did there, where you tried to suggest that Sandy doesn't know what she's talking about, that was really inappropriate. And when you called her well-spoken and articulate, I just want you to know that that was also inappropriate because of the history of where that type of reaction comes from. The journalist yelled out, I am not a racist. I don't know where you're getting that from. And my colleague, Raven, she says, I didn't say that you were. I'm just saying that what you've done is inappropriate. He said, I cannot believe this. I'm from Africa. I'm from Burundi, which is in Africa. And I want you to know. And Raven was like, I just want you to know that that was inappropriate. There's nothing else here. That's all it is. Afterwards, the journalist had no further questions for Across Boundaries, who held the event, went to the executive director of Across Boundaries and said, I'm no longer filing this story about Andrew Loku. I'm no longer filing this story about this coroner's inquest, about the recommendations that were made, about a man who was murdered in his apartment 21 seconds after a police officer arrived, because I was offended today. And that's how these things happen. That's the type of media, the media mediates everything that you see. And by standing up and saying, I refuse to be treated like this, the media then decides, then we refuse to tell the truth about your stories. They can do that. Final story is of how we got here, how we got to this place. There's this brilliant professor, Dr. Charmaine Nelson at McGill, who's doing a lot of work around portraiture, a way of viewing portraiture. She presented at the Art Gallery of Ontario, I think a couple of years ago now, and I thought it was so brilliant. She wrote an article this week. And her portraits are of, or her investigation of portraits are of runaway slave advertisements in Canada. So she investigates these runaway slave advertisements that describe Black people who've escaped enslavement and what they look like, and in an attempt to bring them back, and reads them into portrait. It's brilliant work. And she wrote an article this week about enslavement in Canada. And a lot of people don't know that that was a thing. It's very strange. That, you know, again, that this borderline, this line, the 49th parallel, so strong. Even though it didn't exist for all of those 400 years that we often reference, that line wasn't always there, but it's so real to us that we would believe that that line prevented any sort of enslavement from coming across that geography. Yes, there was enslavement here. And the legacy of that brings us to where we are today. And it's important that we understand that. There's a lot of resistance to hearing and reflecting on that legacy, but it's important that we do. You've all heard about the Underground Railroad, about how the Underground Railroad stopped in Canada, the promised land for Black people. But what a lot of people in Canada don't know, and what they should know, is that there was another Underground Railroad route that went from north to south. Why wouldn't we know that? Why wouldn't that be taught in schools? Part of what was happening at the time was that there was a policy shift in the United States, and a very similar, as these things go forever and ever, a very similar policy shift in Canada that meant that when someone was born outside of captivity, they would be free. But if they were born in captivity, they would not be free. And so people were trying to get to another jurisdiction, both above the 49th parallel and below it. People from Canada were escaping to New York. And people from the United States were escaping to Canada to avoid that same policy on both sides. But we are so mythologized that so many people don't know that history. It's outrageous. And also don't know the history that the police, both in the United States and Canada, operated, their history is a history of patrols that were meant to return people's property that had escaped. And so when people in the in history were asking Black people on the street for their manumission papers to prove that they were free, you can draw a line from that moment to today of police officers asking for carding information from Black people on the street. It's actually a continuation of a culture of how these institutions work. Those practices never stopped. They evolved, they shifted, but those practices didn't stop, and we need to stop mythologizing things. We need to really face the facts and what this is. To serve and protect only some. It was never meant for us. And so what does that mean? Why won't we grapple with it? I'll tell you something. If we're going to solve this thing, if we're going to do something about it, we have to face it head on. It can't be that when someone says the word racism, it's so offensive that we can no longer talk about the story. What's offensive is the way that we are treated. That's the offense. Hearing the word racism, oh God. So easy. It's the easiest thing, to have to go through to hear that something was racist. Something that maybe you believed was great is racist. It's not that difficult to hear that and then say, okay, this is something that we have to change. But there's such resistance to it. It's so difficult. And if it feels that difficult for you, for folks who are watching or for folks who are here, just imagine how difficult it is to go through it, to actually experience that racism. The final thing that I have to say, because I know I'm also long-winded sometimes, is about belief. And the belief that we can change the system. That's what this is really about. I'm so inspired by my ancestors and the elders in our community who really believed that something could shift. Like, could you imagine living through an institution of enslavement and believing that you could change that? Somebody believed that they could shift that entire system, and then they did. They shifted our entire economic system. People believed that. They imagined a different world. Now we're still working through that. We're still working through the effects of that. We're still working through an incarceration system that continues a legacy of enslavement, for sure. So the project is incomplete. But people got together and believed that they could shift something, and that's so much of what this project is. When we did this action that was, we called Tent City, it was, we did a 15-day occupation of Toronto Police Headquarters, which was, I'm like giggling to myself because it just was wildly not what we expected it to be. It didn't go down like how we thought. It was supposed to be at Nathan Phillips Square. It was supposed to be like 6 hours. It was 15 days, and it was at Toronto Police Headquarters. So anyway, you know, sometimes things shift and you have to change. When we did that, I learned so much about belief and how that can really change things. You know, I was still working full time at the time, so I was like going to work in the morning, and then I would come home. I would go to Tent City, and I'd be there until probably 6 in the morning, and then I'd go to my home and shower, and then go back to work and sleep on the train. It was a very difficult 15-day existence. But when we, you know, there was a shift that happened on, I think, about the second day, when we realized that not only had we gotten ourselves to believe that we could make some significant changes if we just stuck this out, but I realized that we had gotten the whole community to feel that way. All of a sudden, people were coming down in droves because it was raining, and now we had 100 umbrellas just everywhere, and people wanted to help. And what do you mean? I came back from work one day, and we had a microwave, and we had a full spread of meals. We had a healthcare center. We had dance instruction in the morning. We had yoga. We had a choir. We had film screenings. We had anything that you could possibly imagine. And that's what was happening. People were imagining a different world where everybody had a place. You know, it was so clean there. Every morning people would do some chores, would clean up, and it wasn't like we sat down and were like, okay, so Jenaya is one day that's gonna do this, and then I'm gonna do this one day. No, people just came together and said, what could a community that really takes care of each other look like? And you know, we were outside. We had street-involved people who were part of the camp as well, who were also just contributing to the space. We were learning from sex workers about the different ways that we could keep each other safe in a reality where police officers were really right across the street and were refusing, would never help us with anything that could go wrong in that space. And so many things could have gone wrong. But it was beautiful. The way that a new community was created in those 15 days. I ate better at Tent City than I do at home. I swear to you, we had 5 hot meals every day. I'm not kidding. And it was amazing. And any leftovers we had, we would make sure that we would give those out on the street. We had blankets, we had people coming by to just give us Tim Hortons or gas cards or, you know, whatever it was. We started out really thinking that this was going to be a 6-hour occupation, so that's what we organized for. And in the end, it was so beautiful. It taught me a lot about what happens when people believe that they can change a system. I mean, people will talk about the wins that we won from that, you know, a change to the way that the SIU does things, a change in provincial policy, so on and so on. But the real win was the community that we built over those 15 days and people knowing what it felt like to really shift and change and build a new culture. It's so important. That's the project. And so allowing ourselves to believe that we can change an entire system, just like our ancestors did, I think that that's what it's going to take to really, truly shift this system for everyone. And so I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy Hudson, for more questions, difficult questions, also for the stories. I think that the stories you told, I'm a journalist. Not all journalists are great, but not all journalists are necessarily as bad as others as well. Stories are very important, I think, and there's something that will be very important, I think, as we go forward. Speaking about going forward, we've run out of time.
Oh my goodness.
So there will be no questions, I guess.
Oh, no.
But there will be an opportunity to speak to the panelists in the lobby immediately after. We have to clear the stage for a rehearsal here this afternoon. But and invite Julie back to the stage to close the event.
Too wordy.
Thank you so much for just a truly insightful morning. And thank you, Paul, Sandy, Jenaya, and Debbie. These forum events always, I wish they could keep going. The forum continues all season long with inspiring guests and opportunities to immerse yourself in our work. Since we're running short on time, I encourage you to pick up a calendar in the lobby for upcoming events, and those out on the World Wide Web. We are live streaming an event next Saturday as well. It's called The Gender Trap. There's more information on the website. Again, sorry, we're running out of time. Paul will be back. It'll be awesome. Thank you so much, and have a great day in Stratford.